Close your eyes and step beyond the veil of sleep into the dream realm. Tonight we journey through the dream as it was dreamt. We begin not at the start of a story, but somewhere in the middle. A room hums softly with light. The air trembles with the sound of something being revealed. On the wall, a film flickers, grainy, tender, half forgotten. It's a story about her. She's moving again, not toward the dreamer, but toward the part of herself that was always waiting to be seen. And behind the camera, someone watches. And now, the Dream Realm presents Bus to Iceland, a documentary of her. Here, the night speaks in whispers and symbols, and every dream holds a hidden truth, waiting for those who dare to look deeper. Now let's begin. The dream begins mid-conversation, as if a film had been running before I arrived. Somewhere behind me, a projector hummed, throwing a thin, white beam that flickered across the walls. Dust hung in the air like snow. The picture on the screen was still too blurred to read. Shapes, motion, nothing solid. But the sound had already arrived. Two women were talking. Their voices overlapped, easy in tone at first, then weighted by something small, but sharp. Friends, I thought. The kind who have shared too many late nights and know exactly where each other's silences live. I leaned towards the sound. They were discussing someone who hadn't shown up. A missed call, an empty seat, a day that had mattered more to one than the other. The words were half lost to static until the air seemed to clear. The projector steadied. The hiss of the reel evened out. That's when I recognized one of the voices. It was hers. Even before I understood what she was saying, my heart stuttered in the automatic way recognition does. Not surprise, not fear, just the sudden certainty of being pulled into a story that already knows your name. The image sharpened. I didn't know who was holding the camera, but I knew who it was about. Her. Not the symbol, not the memory. Her. The woman my soul keeps remembering before the world allows us to meet. In the scene before me was a kitchen. Even in the grainy film light, I could tell it was morning. The gray kind that comes before the sun decides what kind of day it wants to be. The window above the sink glowed faintly. Curtains drawn halfway, the edges trembling in a quiet draft. The voice of the friend carried from the next room, softened by the distance. She was speaking to someone unseen, her words rising and falling in the ordinary rhythm of people who have already had this conversation too many times. Then she stepped into view, small and certain, her sweater sleeves pushed to her elbow. She paused by the counter. A pastry sat on a small plate, still dusted with sugar. Beside it, a folded note rested on the wood. One corner caught under a coffee cup to keep it from blowing away in the breeze that came through a slightly open window. The friend looked at it for a long moment before touching it. Her thumb ran along the edges of the paper. Then she exhaled, a slow breath that carried more weight than words could hold. She wasn't angry, not really. Her disappointment came out soft, the way it does when someone's used to loving people who disappear. She unfolded the note carefully, smoothing it flat. I couldn't read the handwriting, only the movement of her eyes as they traced each line. When she finished, she folded it again, smaller this time, as if to keep its contents from escaping. On the table, a candle had burned itself out during the night, leaving a small crater of wax. She reached for it absently, pressing her thumb into the hollow, then wiped the smudge against her sleeve. Behind her, a kettle began to whistle. She turned it off, poured the water into 2 cups anyway, though the 1 cup already sat cold beside her. For a moment, she leaned both hands on the counter and stared at the empty chair across from her. She left food, she murmured, almost to herself. She always leaves something. Her voice was gentle, but the words carried the tiredness of repetition. She reached for the pastry, broke it in half, and set 1 piece on a napkin across from her, as if pretending someone might walk in and take it. Then she sat down and ate her half slowly, crumbs clinging to her fingertips. The camera didn't move. It let her sit in that silence, the faint sound of the spoon against the cup filling the space where conversation used to be. Outside, a car door slammed. For a moment, the sound felt far away, part of another world, but then came the unmistakable click of a front door unlocking. Footsteps crossed the hall, measured, familiar, not hurried. The woman at the table looked up just before another figure entered the frame. An older woman stepped into view, framed by the pale rectangle of the doorway. Her movements were slow but sure, as if she already knew the layout of this moment. Dark hair gathered at her collar, a sweater hanging loose at her shoulders. Her gaze swept the table, the note, the untouched half of a pastry, and finally the younger woman. She sighed, not out of judgment, but recognition. "You know her," she simply said. It wasn't a question. It was the kind of statement born from years of watching the same story play itself out in smaller, quieter rooms. The younger woman nodded, eyes dropping to the napkin. "I do," she whispered. The older woman smiled faintly, lines deepening around her mouth. "She never means harm," she said, "but she always leaves the evidence." For a moment, the 2 of them stood suspended in the same stillness, the air between them filled with all the times the scene had already happened. The mother reached forward, brushed a crumb from the table with her fingertip, and looked toward the window, where the curtains moved slightly in the breeze. "She's out there somewhere," she murmured, almost to herself. "Always is." The camera stayed fixed, catching the small tremor of light as the curtain lifted and fell again. Then, as if obeying some hidden cue, the picture began to waver. The edges softened, colors washing into one another. The kitchen faded, the woman's shape dissolving into the flicker of the projector's glow. The blur steadied into motion once again. A path took shape, narrow, lined with trees that had already begun to shed their leaves. Wind carried the sound of gravel shifting under slow footsteps. The older woman was walking now, a wool coat buttoned halfway, her hands tucked into her pockets against the chill. The camera followed as if I was someone walking right next to her. She didn't look over, didn't seem to notice she was being filmed. Her voice came soft, steady, the kind that fills the air even when spoken to no one. "She's always been like this," she said. A bird startled from the brush ahead, flashing white wings before disappearing into the gray sky. "She doesn't mean to hurt anyone," the woman went on. "She just doesn't know how to stay still. She isn't someone who can be contained. It's not possible." She paused to step over a puddle, her reflection rippling apart. The wind tugged a few strands of silver hair loose from her collar. "She's different. Always has been." Her breath clouded in front of her, faint and rhythmic. Her fire is like everybody else's church. The road, the next idea, the new sky, that's where she prays. The wind picked up, shaking the trees until leaves scattered across the path. The woman stood there a while longer, coat pressed against her body, her face calm. Then she turned and began walking again, her figure growing smaller between the rows of trees. The camera stayed where it was, holding the shot long enough for the sounds of footsteps to fade. When the last echo disappeared, the picture shimmered. The light stretched thin. Her outline broke apart into fragments of gold and gray. When the image cleared, the world had changed. Mountains pressed against the clouds like dark knuckles breaking through ice. Below them, rivers of snow wound through fields of black volcanic stone. Iceland. The scene cut softly, the low crunch of boots on frost, wind sweeping against the microphone. She and her friend stood beside a small rental car, breath curling in the cold. Neither spoke. The silence between them had thawed a little, enough to be comfortable again. The next scene opened wide. They were standing on a cliff above the sea, bundled in coats that snapped in the wind. Steam rose from fissures in the rocks below, glowing faintly where sunlight struck. The sky hung low, a single expanse of silver. She moved toward the edge until the wind caught her hair and blew it across her face. She laughed, quick, unguarded, and for the first time in the film her voice carried freely, without strain. A friend lifted a small camera, captured her there against the endless white. "Got it," she said, lowering the lens. She just smiled and turned back to the sea. The sound was mostly wind, steady, alive, threaded with the faint murmur of distant waves. For a moment, everything held still, the steam rising, the light pulsing through the clouds, her figure outlined against the void. Then she took a breath and stepped back from the edge, face flushed, eyes bright. Her friend lowered the camera slightly, keeping it close to her chest. "Why now?" she asked. The question lingered, suspended in the cold air between them. Not impatient, just heavy with meaning. It seemed to wait for its own permission to be answered. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she turned toward the cliff's edge and scanned the horizon. She drew in another long breath, steady and full, then exhaled and smiled. Small, private, as if she was remembering and letting go of something all in one thought. The screen froze there, her outline against the sky, light trembling on the edges of the frame. A faint click sounded as the projector reached its end. The film's hum slowed, flickered once, and stopped. The room was dim, except for the white glow on the wall. Dust drifted through the beam. Somewhere behind me, a chair creaked. My sister sat beside me, elbows on her knees, eyes fixed on the frozen image. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just watched that single frame as if it might start moving again if she stared long enough. I wanted to ask her what she thought, but the words felt out of place, too loud for the quiet that hung between us. On the screen, the light from the cliff began to fade, slowly, like a sunset seen through fog. The last thing I saw was her face, that same private smile, still holding whatever truth it had found. Then the screen went black. A sound replaced the silence. Not the hum of the projector, but something deeper. A low, rhythmic vibration. I blinked. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The air smelled like diesel and wet wool. Outside, snow pressed against a window, melting to the thin streams of water that raced towards the glass's edge. I was sitting in a bus seat, and she was there, a few rows ahead of. Her head turned toward the window. She looked calm, almost content, but there was something else beneath it. A thought turning over quietly, like a stone in her hand. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and I realized with a slow pulse of recognition that I wasn't watching her anymore. I was there. The driver's radio murmured a song I didn't recognize. The rhythm of tires over uneven asphalt gave the air a pulse. Time stretched, then folded in on itself, and I forgot whether I'd just arrived or been traveling for hours. A girl sat beside her. Young, bright-eyed, already aware of who she was. She smiled with quick enthusiasm of someone meeting a person they admire. "Is your boyfriend here too?" she asked. I almost laughed under my breath. How in the world does she even have time to maintain that relationship? She returned the smile, small and distant, her tone both kind and far away. "I miss being a rebel," she said softly. Then after a pause, still watching the window, the girl blinked uncertain, then nodded and turned back to her friends. She went on watching the passing dark, her reflection layered with streaks of snow and the amber glow of passing lights. I couldn't look away. It was her voice, the same tone I'd heard in the film. But here it was alive, unfiltered, breathing. Every syllable carried warmth, like language rediscovering itself after too long in silence. I watched her rest her chin on her hand, eyes half closed, and for the briefest moment, I thought she might be aware of me. Not by sight, but by that subtle shift of energy when two thoughts occupy the same air. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. It felt enough just to be there. And then the dream ended. The dream fades, but its atmosphere remains. The wind, the sound of the sea, the hum of something witnessed but not fully understood. Who was filming? Why Iceland? The friend with the camera? Was it about distance or return? About seeing her again or finally seeing what she had become? What did she find at the edge of the cliff? And why did the film stop right before she spoke? The story is over, but the dream is now just beginning to reveal its meaning. Step with me into the next chapter where we enter the interpretation and uncover the meaning behind the documentary of her. Until then, let your dreams speak and listen with your heart. I'll see you soon when we meet again in the dream realm.